"Ma'am, step aside. You match the suspect's description." Those were the exact words a young white officer said to Judge Naomi Sinclair just minutes before she was set to preside over a landmark trial on racial profiling. The irony: that same officer walked into her courtroom later that day as the defendant. This isn't fiction. This is the unsettling truth about how power, bias, and justice collide in modern America. As James Baldwin once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." In this story, the robe of justice didn't shield Naomi. It tested her. What happens when the judge becomes the judged, and the accuser must face the truth in front of the very person they wronged? Watch until the end, then let me know in the comments what would you have done in her shoes. And if stories like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. The morning sun cut through the thick clouds over downtown Atlanta, casting long shadows on the courthouse steps. Judge Naomi Sinclair, a commanding black woman in her early 50s, pulled into the side parking lot behind the Fulton County Courthouse. Today wasn't just another day. It was the beginning of the most important case of her career, a civil rights lawsuit involving racial profiling and police misconduct. The media swarmed the front of the courthouse, eager for sound bites and spectacle. Naomi, in her signature navy blue blazer and low heels, chose the side entrance to avoid the chaos. She had walked this path hundreds of times, but this morning felt different. As she approached the employee entrance, a young white officer stepped forward, blocking her path. He wore reflective sunglasses and a stiff uniform, his nameplate catching the light. Officer Travis McNeil. "Ma'am," he said, holding up a hand, "I need to see some identification." Naomi, already reaching into her bag, pulled out her government-issued judicial ID and held it up. "I'm Judge Sinclair. I'm presiding over the Brooks case this morning." McNeil didn't even glance at the ID. His eyes stayed locked on her face. "There was a report of suspicious activity nearby," he said, his voice tight. "And you matched the description." Naomi froze. "Excuse me?" "Black female, mid-age, dark clothing," he continued, his hands slowly drifting toward the handcuffs clipped to his belt. Naomi's breath caught. "Officer, I am not only a federal judge. I am late to the courtroom where I'm due in 10 minutes. Step aside." McNeil squared his shoulders. "I'm gonna need you to stay right here while I call it in." She took a sharp breath, pulse accelerating. Her fingers curled tightly around her ID badge. "You are detaining a sitting federal judge on the courthouse premises. Like I said, ma'am, you match a description." In the rising silence, Naomi could hear her heart pounding in her ears. The audacity, the absurdity, the rage. She had spent her life fighting for justice, and now, here she was, treated like a suspect at the very doors of justice. Just then, a second voice rang out, deep and commanding. "McNeil, what the hell are you doing?" Both turned to see Lieutenant Carl Monroe striding toward them, a seasoned black officer with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes. Monroe didn't need an introduction. "That's Judge Naomi Sinclair," Monroe snapped. "She's presiding over courtroom 4B today. Did you even look at her ID?" McNeil hesitated, blinking. She matched." "Are you out of your damn mind?" Monroe barked. "You want to get suspended? You want to make the evening news?" McNeil stammered something unintelligible, stepping back with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Naomi remained still, her jaw clenched, chest rising, and falling rapidly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The insult had been delivered. The damage was done. "You okay, Judge?" Monroe asked, lowering his voice. She nodded stiffly. "I will be." Without another word, Naomi brushed past them and entered the courthouse, her heels clicking like gavel strikes across the marble floor. She walked tall, but inside, she was boiling, shaking. The irony was too sharp to ignore. Today, she was supposed to oversee a case about racial profiling, and this morning, she had lived it. Inside her chambers, she dropped her bag on the leather couch and stared at her reflection in the glass window. Her hands trembled. She flexed her fingers. She wouldn't let it break her, but it had already changed something. Moments later, As she adjusted her robe and prepared to take the bench, she reminded herself of one truth. The robe didn't protect her from injustice. It never had. It only made her responsible for confronting it. As the bailiff knocked on her door and called out, "They're ready for you, Judge," she took a deep breath. So was she. The courtroom was packed, reporters lining the back, murmurs rippling through the gallery, and the scent of fresh coffee lingering from the media crew outside. Judge Naomi Sinclair sat tall behind the bench, her face haste but her grip on the gavel tight. She scanned the room, taking in the jurors, the attorneys, and a defendant, a young black man named Elijah Brooks. He looked barely 21, dressed in a simple button-down and slacks. His eyes darted nervously around the room, occasionally locking onto his public defender. Today's case was about him, but the tension Naomi felt had less to do with the defendant and more to do with the man walking into the witness box. Officer Travis McNeil, the same officer who had tried to detain her just over an hour ago. Naomi's pulse quickened as he stepped forward, still in uniform, though clearly less confident now. His eyes flickered toward the bench, and for a split second, recognition flared, then faded into a mask of professionalism. She leaned slightly forward, listening as the prosecution opened their case. "This isn't just about one arrest," said Assistant District Attorney Maria DeWitt, a woman in her 40s with sharp features and a voice like ice. "It's about a system that lets assumptions ipsum action." Elijah Brooks was arrested without cause, handcuffed in front of his neighbors, detained overnight, and never charged. Why? Because he looked like he didn't belong. The jury was listening. Naomi could tell. Some leaned in, others furrowed brows. DeWitt turned toward the defense table. Mr. Brooks had no weapon, no contraband, no criminal record. He was simply waiting for a ride home. Elijah looked down at his hands, clenched in his lap. "Your Honor," DeWitt said, "the prosecution calls Officer Travis McNeil to the stand." The air in the room seemed to change as McNeil took the oath. Naomi watched him closely. His hands trembled as he placed them on the rail of the witness box. "Officer McNeil," DeWitt began, "walk us through the events of June 3rd. McNeil cleared his throat. "I was patrolling the Riverview area. That's when I saw the suspect, Mr. Brooks, standing on the corner, looking around, checking his phone." "And that seemed suspicious to you?" DeWitt asked. "He appeared nervous, fidgety," McNeil said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. It was the same explanation he had given when confronting her. "Was Mr. Brooks doing anything illegal?" DeWitt continued. "No," McNeil admitted. "Did he resist arrest?" "No." "Did you find any drugs, weapons, or stolen property?" "No." The silence that followed was almost painful. "So," DeWitt said, stepping closer, "you arrested him because he looked nervous?" McNeil shifted uncomfortably. "He matched a description we were given earlier that day." "What was that description?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Black male, dark hoodie, jeans." Naomi felt a chill ripple down her spine. That was all it took. "Officer McNeil," DeWitt pressed, her tone sharpening, "how many young black men in Atlanta fit that description on any given day?"
McNeil didn't answer.
Naomi looked at the jury. Some were visibly disturbed. Others kept their faces blank. But the room was beginning to feel heavier. "Let's be clear," DeWitt said. "You made a call based on appearance, not behavior. And in doing so, you humiliated an innocent man, traumatized him, and gave a record he didn't deserve." McNeil opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no justification that could undo what had happened. Naomi took a long breath. The parallels between what Elijah endured and what she had experienced just outside this building were undeniable. She wasn't just watching justice unfold. She was a part of it now. As DeWitt stepped back, Elijah was called to the stand. He walked slowly, shoulders tight. When he spoke, his voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each word. "I was just waiting for my ride," he said. "They didn't ask questions. They didn't listen. They saw me and decided I was guilty." The room was silent. Naomi could feel the weight of every word settle like dust. When the defense attorney declined to cross-examine, Naomi adjourned the court for recess. She rose from her seat and retreated to her chambers without a word. Inside, she leaned against the door, closed her eyes, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The system she had sworn to uphold had revealed its cracks again. But this time, it was personal. And the fight for justice was no longer something she presided over from the bench. It was something she lived. The courtroom was still as Officer Travis McNeil remained seated in the witness stand, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles bone white. The energy in the room had shifted. What began as a routine hearing had turned into something far more uncomfortable, for him, for the court, and for the justice system itself. Judge Naomi Sinclair adjusted her robe, her face unreadable, but inside her mind spun with emotion. The man sitting before her had, just that morning, tried to detain her as if she were a criminal. Now he sat under oath, attempting to justify the same instinct-driven behavior that had nearly led to her own humiliation. The irony clung to every breath. Assistant District Attorney Maria DeWitt wasn't finished. She stepped forward, heels tapping softly on the courtroom floor, and faced Officer McNeil again. "Officer," she said, "you testified that Mr. Brooks looked nervous. Can you explain what that looked like to you?" McNeil hesitated. He was checking his phone, looking around. DeWitt tilted her head. "So checking your phone while waiting for a ride is suspicious?" McNeil opened his mouth, but no words came out. DeWitt continued, "Would you have stopped a white college student doing the same thing?" McNeil looked down. I can't say." Naomi leaned forward slightly, watching the jurors. Some exchanged glances. One elderly woman folded her arms and stared at McNeil with a hardened expression. The truth was coming into view. DeWitt pressed again. "Let's talk about your decision to arrest Mr. Brooks. You said he matched a description. Black male, dark hoodie, jeans. Do you know how many young black men in this city wear those things every single day?" McNeil shifted in his seat. "It was a match," he mumbled. "A match," DeWitt repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a gavel strike. "Except there was no evidence, no warrant, no reason other than a gut feeling." She walked over to the jury box. This is what happens when bias masquerades as suspicion. Mr. Brooks wasn't arrested for committing a crime. He was arrested for existing. The jury sat in absolute silence. Naomi gripped her gavel tighter. Elijah Brooks had returned to the stand, his hands folded neatly in his lap. DeWitt addressed him with care. "Elijah," she said, "when Officer McNeil approached you, what did he say?" "He asked what I was doing," Elijah replied. "I told him I was waiting for my Uber. He told me to stand still, then put me in handcuffs. I kept asking why, but didn't answer." "Did you resist?" "No. I was scared. I didn't want to make it worse." Naomi felt the pain behind his words. Not just fear, but humiliation, the kind that lingered long after the handcuffs were removed. DeWitt gave him a nod. "Thank you." Then she turned to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't just about Elijah. It's about every person who's been judged first by appearance and second by the facts." She paused, letting that truth land. "In this courtroom, we rely on evidence, on truth, not assumptions. That's the difference between justice and injustice." The air felt heavier than before. Naomi could sense the emotional toll weighing on everyone present, including herself. When the defense attorney stood, he offered no questions, only silence. Naomi glanced at the clock on the wall. Time had slowed, but the moment felt seismic. "Court is adjourned for the day," she said, voice steady but low. "We will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow." The bang of her gavel echoed like thunder. As everyone stood, Naomi remained seated. She watched as Officer McNeil stepped down from the stand and walked past Elijah, avoiding eye contact. He looked smaller than before, his steps slower, his shoulders lower. When the courtroom emptied, Naomi walked quietly back to her chambers. Once inside, she sat alone for a long moment, her hands folded on her desk. The system had been exposed again, and this time it had spoken through voices long ignored. But something else hung in the back of her mind, the image of McNeil squirming under the weight of his own actions. She had seen fear, yes, but also something else. Doubt. It was small, fragile, barely there. But it was a start. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity the following morning. Everyone could feel it, the gravity of what was coming. The jurors looked weary, but alert. Reporters tapped rapidly on their laptops, and Elijah Brooks sat beside his attorney, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Judge Naomi Sinclair entered from the side door, her expression firm but her eyes heavy. She had barely slept. As she took her seat on the bench, she scanned the room and paused. Officer Travis McNeil was already there, seated at the defense table. He was no longer in uniform. Today he wore a wrinkled gray suit that didn't quite fit, as though he'd borrowed it last minute. His badge was gone, his posture was slumped. He looked like someone who had aged 10 years overnight. Naomi adjusted her microphone. Court will now come to order. Assistant District Attorney DeWitt stood and faced the jury. Her voice was calm but resolute. Yesterday you heard testimony that showed a clear pattern. A young man arrested for nothing more than fitting a vague description. A police officer acting on bias rather than fact. Today you have a decision to make. Is that justice? She turned toward the jurors. When our institutions stop holding people accountable, injustice becomes routine. But when we draw a line, when we say enough, that's when change begins. The jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom emptied, except for Naomi, who remained behind the bench, staring down at her notes. Her gavel sat untouched. For the first time in her career, she wasn't sure she was only a judge in this case. She was also a witness, a participant. She had felt the weight of this issue not just from the bench, but at the courthouse door. Time dragged. Minutes turned into an hour. Then the knock came. The jury has reached a verdict, the bailiff announced. People filed back into the courtroom, tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. Naomi watched the jury foreperson, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, stand and unfold a piece of paper with trembling hands. In the matter of Officer Travis McNeil, she began, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial discrimination. A sharp intake of breath swept across the room. Elijah's eyes closed as he exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging with relief. His attorney reached over and gave his arm a light pat. A few reporters stood, ready to bolt for the door and break the news. At the defense table, McNeil didn't move. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping his knees so tightly the veins bulged from his skin. Naomi let the moment breathe before raising her gavel. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed like a closing chapter. But just as Naomi prepared to leave the bench, McNeil rose to his feet. Your Honor, he said, voice hoarse. May I speak? A murmur passed through the gallery. Naomi raised an eyebrow. She studied him. No longer the smug officer who had blocked her path, but a man stripped of certainty. You may, she said cautiously. He swallowed hard. I thought I was doing the right thing. I really believed I was protecting people. But I see now, I wasn't protecting anyone. I was targeting them. His voice cracked, and for a moment, he struggled to continue. I didn't see Elijah as a person. I saw a threat, and that's on me. The courtroom was utterly still. Even the reporters had stopped typing. McNeil's eyes met Naomi's. I'm sorry for what I did. To him. To others. Maybe even to you. Naomi's breath hitched, but her face remained composed. Noted, Mr. McNeil, she said. But apologies don't undo harm. What matters now is what you do with the truth you've seen. He nodded, lips pressed tightly together. No excuses. No rebuttals, just silence. As he was escorted out of the courtroom, Naomi watched him go, not with anger, but with a strange, aching clarity. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like reckoning. She turned to Elijah, who had stood up and was hugging his mother. Tears streamed down the older woman's face, her hands clinging to her son as if she feared letting go. Naomi took one last look at the gavel resting in her hand. Today it had spoken loudly, but tomorrow it would need to speak again. The next morning, the air around the courthouse felt different. The tension that had hung over the building all week was still there, but it had shifted, less suffocating now, more reflective. Judge Naomi Sinclair sat in her chambers, a steaming mug of black coffee resting beside the case files on her desk. The trial of Elijah Brooks was over. Officer Travis McNeil had been found guilty. The headlines were everywhere. Protesters had gathered on the courthouse steps, holding signs demanding police reform and racial justice. But Naomi wasn't thinking about the cameras or the coverage. She was thinking about what came next. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, not looking up. Her court clerk peeked in. "Judge, Lieutenant Monroe is here. He asked to speak with you." Naomi set down her mug. "Send him in." Moments later, Lieutenant Carl Monroe stepped into the room. He looked tired, but resolute, holding his hat in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. "Judge Sinclair," he said, his voice low but steady. "Thanks for seeing me." "Always," she replied, gesturing toward the chair across from her. Monroe sat down, exhaled slowly, and leaned forward. "I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled the case." Naomi offered a faint smile. "I was doing my job." "No," Monroe said, shaking his head. "This was more than that. You didn't just apply the law, you made people see the cracks in the system out loud, in front of everyone." She studied him carefully. Did they see it, though? Or did they just see one bad cop get what was coming? "They saw more than that," Monroe said. "At least I hope they did." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about how these young officers aren't trained to question what they're taught. That hit me." Monroe nodded slowly. "I've trained hundreds over the years. Some come in with the right heart, but the system teaches them to fear, not to understand. And we don't challenge that early enough." He hesitated, then added, "McNeil, I don't know if he'll ever wear a badge again. Maybe he shouldn't, but I saw something in him yesterday. Shame, and maybe a spark of awareness." Naomi's expression softened slightly. "He did something rare. He admitted he was wrong. That doesn't undo what he did, but it might mean he won't do it again." "Exactly," Monroe said. "And if we want real change, we need to create space for those moments, for growth, not just punishment." Naomi sighed and rubbed her temples. "I've spent my whole career chasing justice from the bench, but sometimes it feels like a revolving door. We fix one thing, 3 more break." Monroe leaned forward. "You know what I think? We don't need to fix everything overnight. We just need to keep pushing. Every case like this one puts pressure on the system, forces it to shift." Naomi looked toward the window, where crowds gathered in the street below. Reporters clustered around microphones. A small group of college students held handmade signs that read "Stop Profiling" and "Justice for Elijah." "There's momentum," she said quietly. "There is," Monroe agreed. "Let's not waste it." A silence passed between them, filled with mutual respect and exhaustion. Then Monroe stood. "I'll let you get back to your day. Just wanted you to know what you did mattered." Naomi nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant." After he left, she sat alone again. But this time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. Later that afternoon, as she stepped out of the courthouse, a familiar face caught her eye. Elijah Brooks stood off to the side, away from the cameras. He wore the same calm, thoughtful expression she had seen in court, but today his shoulders were straighter, his gaze steadier. "Judge Sinclair," he called out softly. She approached him. "Elijah, I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "Not just for believing me, but for making them listen." Naomi shook her head. "You did that. I just gave you the space." He nodded. "It wasn't just about me. I know that now. What happened in that courtroom, it gave people hope." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "That hope is powerful, but it has to turn into action. Keep speaking up. Keep being seen." I will, he promised. As he turned and walked away, Naomi's eyes drifted to the far end of the plaza. There, standing silently among the crowd, was Travis McNeil. No badge, no uniform, just a man, stripped of his authority, watching from a distance. Their eyes met for a moment. He gave her a slow, solemn nod. Naomi returned it, not with forgiveness, not with approval, but with recognition. Then she turned toward the steps, walking forward into the swirl of reporters, chants, and flashing lights. Justice had spoken, but the work was far from over. True justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about vision. A. New reminds us that prejudice can wear a uniform, and authority doesn't always mean accountability. Like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, but only if we pull it." In this story, Judge Sinclair didn't just deliver a ruling. She sparked a reckoning. Officer McNeil's transformation reminds us that change starts when we dare to confront the uncomfortable truths within ourselves. In Elijah's voice, it echoes for everyone who's ever been silenced. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or even just pause, please hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what stood out most to you. And if you believe in stories that challenge injustice and uplift truth, I'd love for you to subscribe and stay connected. Your voice matters here. Let's keep pushing that arc together.